Nice. Yeah, I forgot. My name is Naomi. I'm a junior in the sociocultural track. Yeah, what am I interested in? That's kind of, I have so many like weird, I like will like think of something like at midnight and write it down and then be like, what was what? That would go nowhere. So I'm still trying to figure that out.
I'm Juliana. I'm a senior in bioanthro, and I'm also doing my master's in public health. So I'm kind of doing more research right now at the med campus on children with congenital heart defects and their access to healthcare in Boston.
I'm Katrina. I'm on the sociocultural track. I'm a junior, and I just spent the summer doing ethnographic field work, which I'm hoping to turn into a thesis. But I'm generally interested in like kinship, care, migration. Once you want themselves as well, if there are any requirements. Hey, can you look? Can you see like who all the participants are? Oh wait,
I think that's everybody on the side.
yeah. Well,
Daniela and Robin, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
I can go. Sorry, I can't turn on my video right now. But my name is Robin. I'm a current senior and I recently start my research for my thesis. For my thesis, I'm looking into the Seoul cityscape and how the cultural meaning of Koreanness is changing through physical landscape. So I'm looking at gentrification as well as westernization of Seoul.
I'm Daniela. I'm a sophomore, so I'm just trying to see if maybe I'll go into honors or not. But nothing concrete yet. So I'm just here to learn a bit more about it.
if anyone has questions about paperwork or the process or anything for any of the students who've done them in the past.
I have a question specifically for Charlotte. So I know you mentioned that you were in surf, and I'm also in surf, so I think that's cool. But your research, I'm assuming since you were in surf, you didn't necessarily agree with the people who you were interviewing. And so I just want to know like what that was like. If you have any recommendations for people who want to do ethnographic work with people that have, differing opinions from them, especially on something like that serious.
Yeah. First of all, love that you're in surf. I miss that group so much. But yeah, it was really hard. It was really difficult. Just like first of all, emotionally, it was like incredibly taxing because the men I was speaking with, like they were all very like they all exactly what you would imagine. Like they all had very like traditional, like super binary gender kind of like ideas of like family and marriage. They all had just like a lot of straight up misogynist opinions. Like they were just like blatantly homophobic and transphobic. And but like that was like what I was interested in researching, was like understanding like why, like what exactly is like the mindset of a person who gets mobilized to participate in a movement that is like so explicitly like anti so many things, like anti-woman, like anti-trans people. Like it's just like that was the research that I wanted to understand. So for me, I had like a little bit of like personal experience already kind of in like hyper religious circles, just because of like how I grew up, and like I went to Catholic school and I spent 4 years being taught like pro-life ideology inside and out and backwards. So like I knew a lot of like the go-to slogans and logic and stuff already. So that was kind of like my point where I was like, okay, I kind of like know what to expect. But then when I actually came to like interviewing these men, I'm kind of grateful actually, because when I was doing my research and my interviews, it was like fall of 2021 into 2022. So I think that was around Omicron in Boston. So I couldn't meet with people in person. So I was doing all of my interviews over Zoom or like over the phone, which I much preferred because I'm a woman, I'm queer. I was on e-board of surf. Like everything about my identity is like fundamentally against a lot of my participants' beliefs. So it was nice kind of to have like literal physical distance between me and my participants. And so that was something I was really grateful for. And I feel like that's not necessarily an unethical way to conduct research if you're speaking to people that like you may for whatever reason feel kind of like unsafe around, or like yeah, like, or if you're gonna research in person, like I was observing these protests in person on ComAv, but I would sit inside Cafe Nero, or I would be like physically removed enough that I wasn't like actively really walking around and like talking to the people who were protesting and kind of like inserting myself into that space. Like I really took um kind of like a removed approach, and that was because in my like preliminary research, when I was kind of trying to suss out like what I wanted my methods to be, like how I wanted to approach this topic, like I know there's this population that exists, but I know that they're like a little scary, like how do I want to approach them? And I was connected with another BU student named Lev, who had done research with the exact same group at who used to protest outside of Planned Parenthood. And he's a white man, so like he had a completely different positionality as a researcher, and like he was able to talk to me about like his experience of like going up to people at these protests and like speaking with them and engaging with them and like asking like, can I demonstrate with you, like can I have some flyers? And like he had a very different positionality than I had, and he received like responses that were kind of like angrier or rude or just like not the safest. So that was kind of like my vetting process of like, okay, if my friend Lev has like had these experiences kind of like really going up to these people in person and talking to them, like then I think I don't want to do that, or I want to like do it in a more calculated way that feels more approachable for me specifically. So that was like how I was just like physically conducting myself with them. And then when it came to like actually interfacing over the interviews, I actually talked a lot about this with Professor Shohet. So she's a great resource if anyone has like concerns about like your positionality as a researcher and like who you're speaking with. But it's technically, I think, like not allowed according to IRB to like conceal your, well, not conceal your identity, lie about your identity, or like lie about who you are or like what you're doing. So I could never like go into an interview and be like, oh yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, like women should not have sex until marriage, totally. Like I like couldn't do that. And if they asked me a question about myself and like who I am as a researcher, what the research is for, like I had to be as transparent and honest as possible. But I did come up with like very clever ways to conceal my identity, or kind of like conceal my politics and my position, because I would the funny thing also about these men that I interviewed, they were just like so excited to talk about themselves and their politics that they like did not have any questions for me. Like I was simply never asked, like, what do you think about this? Which in and of itself was really interesting. But when they would kind of be like, oh, you know what I mean, I would just say, oh, well, I was raised Catholic, which is true. And I just like wouldn't say anything else. And they would hear that and like interpret that as like, oh, she's completely on the same page as me. Like we have all the same beliefs then because she's Catholic. And like I'm so not a practicing Catholic, but like that is the truth. I was raised Catholic. So that was kind of like the card I would play if I ever was like questioned about like, well, what do you think about this? Or like, I don't know. So it's tricky though, because when you're in a position like that where you're like interviewing people who just have like drastically different identity and politics than yourself, and like you want to protect your identity but still be doing ethical research, you just come up with kind of like subtle ways to like deflect attention away from yourself and like back to the person. And people love talking about themselves, so it's really not hard. But I did kind of come up with a strategy with Professor Shohet, like before I spoke to all of these men, just like for my own peace of mind and just so like I knew what I would say if I was like asked about those kinds of things. So for me, it was like it all ended up going smoothly. Um, but yeah, I kind of had a very specific situation. So I hope that provides some insight.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you. I have a question. So I talked about this with Professor Hodges-Simeon for her being my advisor for this, but she's currently out of commission. I was wondering how anyone thinks I should go about finding an advisor while she's doing her research.
So back next year, but yeah.
I'll be a senior next year. That's
It'll
what I
be a
know.
senior, yeah. So, yeah, you can identify a secondary advisor who would also sit in. I think it's just a matter of thinking about what your questions are and what your thesis is going to be. If you want to come and talk to me, like I'm happy to kind of talk you through it and figure out if you want to be people really cares. It's me, there's Professor Knott, and then Professor Borlaki. And if you're doing something very like socially oriented, but anything else in students, like Professor Borlaki might be a natural secondary advisor. But if it's more physiological, then either myself or Professor Knott we can talk it through and figure it out.
And the other thing to say, I always say to students, because I think I also advised students while I was on leave. So I think as faculty in general, we try to be as available as possible to students. So yes, we're on leave and are supposed to get a break, but you know, it's also possible to work with it, and I think a lot of faculty would still do that.
Yeah, unless she was like, I know.
She was like, how I don't want to talk to you, I don't think you can be done exactly.
But that's another question.
But I think it's more that if you know that you want to work with specific faculty and they're out, it's, you're allowed to ask. They can always say that.
But yeah, if you shoot me an email, so.
Yeah, I was, like, for anyone, how did you draw inspiration? What kind of motivated you to like research the topic you're researching? Like, were you unsure, or did you know like 100% going into what you wanted to do?
So when I decided rather that I wanted to pursue honors, I think the first thing that came to my mind was, you know, what gets me up in the morning, what motivates me, where do I find a lot of the perspectives that I look at the world with, and how do I see the world, and what informs the way that I, you know, take up space in this world. And the first answer, the biggest answer, at least in my case, was disability. And that stems from the fact that my sister is on the autism spectrum. my whole life, I've known nothing but autism, and not in a bad way. It's just part of my background. It's part of how I grew up. And I think that that's probably the biggest question. Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you think about? What informs how you think about what you do every day? I think that that's, especially in a sociocultural context, in my experience, that was probably the biggest driving question is who am I? How do I think? And that question was answered by my sister. So I started off, not entirely sure of the direction I wanted to take, which is probably how most people start off. And I originally wanted to do a project that was actually inspired by something I did in high school about sexual assault within disabled communities, and how there's a sexual assault epidemic in disabled communities that no one talks about, because they're often silent victims. No one, either the evidence of assault isn't put in court, or people are simply not believed because they are disabled, and they're perceived as faking it or making up stories. So that was one thing that I considered, but I ultimately obviously didn't end up on that. I ended up on the project I did, which was about me. It was so weird to articulate that during our RB and during the proposal process, but essentially, I mean, I said the word autoethnographic earlier, and I know, obviously most people in this room can deduce what that means, but autoethnographic is ethnography work that's done primarily about you or an experience that you shared, which I think is a really useful tool. I think in the process of research, at least the preconceived notions that I had about research was I had to go into a lab and I had to cure cancer. That's, in my mind, that was what research was. And that's simply not true. I think that autoethnography, especially in the field of anthropology, is a very underutilized tool. And it's a really amazing tool. It helps you feel closer to the communities that allow you to explore the questions that get you up in the morning, that affect your daily life. So going back to my actual thesis topic, like I said, when I wrote my proposal materials, when I formulated and articulated what I wanted to say to the IRB, I essentially explained that, you know, I grew up the sibling of an autistic person. So that was how I was raised. I was raised knowing that one day I would have to be someone's sole advocate. I would have to be someone's sole medical and healthcare provider. I would have to be someone's sole financial advisor. All of these things were factors that played into the backdrop against which I was raised. So I think a safe question to ask yourself when thinking about what you want to research is, first of all, who are you? Second of all, where do you come from? What do you think about? And I think the biggest question I asked myself throughout not just formulating my idea, but throughout the entire course of my research was, how did the way I was raised and the way my upbringing forced me to think about things and make decisions come to inform how I live my life on a daily basis? Because that's really, I mean, that's my thesis in a nutshell. How does the way I was raised come to, you know, when I get up in the morning, how does that tell me how to live my life? And it was another thing that I guess I mentioned before I wrap up, is that when I was conducting my research, like I said, you know, a lot of people have this preconceived notion that research is you go into a lab and you work with cells, and for many people, especially in biomed, that's what you do. But or not, I don't know. I'm not a biomed researcher, but I guess something that was really particularly rewarding about my research experience as someone who did a lot of autoethnography was illuminating the community that you yourself were a part of, or me myself am a part of, but you don't really acknowledge that it exists. Like that your entire life you just kind of accept, like, this is my norm, this is what I know. But I think there's really something to be said for acknowledging the fact that you belong to a community, even though there may not be literature, or it's well articulated, or it's well represented in you know, the world that we live in. Like if you look up, you know, stories about siblings of autistic people, there's not a whole lot of literature there. There's not a whole lot of communities, online, physical, or otherwise. So I think that being so well connected and really grounding yourself in who you are is a really important part of the research that's really beneficial. And also you have the opportunity to, at least in my research, provide people with almost sort of a community in doing the research about the community itself. I had a lot of people tell me that before being my interviewee, no one had ever asked them about their experience, where they didn't even, like myself at the beginning of the research, even acknowledge that it was part of who they, it was once again just their norm. They didn't even realize it. So I think that that's probably a good place to start, asking yourself, you know, when, for lack of a better word.
Can I just jump in 1 second though? I want to contest a little bit what you said, because I mean, yes, you did research about yourself, but actually I think that just like Charlotte, you also did research with and about other people.
Yes.
And in your interviews, you found out that not everybody had the same experiences as you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important, and that's something in anthropology that, of course, Charlotte and I, as it so happens, came in with the same idea and the same preconceived notions about what those men would be like. But I think as an anthropologist, you also have a responsibility to listen to people and represent them as they are, without demonizing and without kind of putting on a pedestal. And I think that you both did that there's some honesty in kind of figuring out, like, so yes, it is about you, but it's also about how you're not everybody, and not everybody is you. And I think that that's something that we can do with anthropology, and that we treat people with respect.
And that can be part of your results.
Yeah.
Your shock with how people act or do not act can be part of your results.
Yeah.
I did not know that. And I told Professor Show that I was like, no one grew up the way I did, and I'm shocked. And she was
Yeah.
like, that's something you write about.
Yeah.
So you not having the results that you expected and or wanted is part of the results process.
I can speak a little bit to the bioanthro side of like deciding on topics and how you go about that. My thing was that I knew I was like in love with bioanthro, and every bioanthro class I had was like my die hard. I'm studying hours for it, even though I don't have to. Like the like level of I'm all about it. I was all in. So all the classes I was taking were fueling this interest that was raw still. Like there's so much in bioanthro to focus on, that I was just like anything I could get my hands on I was into. So when I joined the lab, and I was like a brand new like sophomore first semester, bright-eyed walking into the lab being like, you got anything for me? And a postdoc who's now a professor, Dr. Stephanie Poindexter, was like, I guess, like, let's look. And the thing that I learned from everybody in that lab, but we worked a lot closely, was that she was just wondering things and like very like, oh, well, maybe this connects to that. And like all of it would be like on a sticky note on the board. And I'm like, that's a whole like honors like project right there, you know? And she'd be like, oh yeah, it's not really like, I'm probably not gonna look at it. And I'm sure somebody could have picked that up and done something really cool with it. So when I was seeing just idea after idea being like passed around in a lab setting like that, we had these lab meetings that were just like, everybody talk about what your research is, and everybody's was so different that it was like, wow, we can all be in the same lab doing very different things. That was when I was like, okay, now what of the bioanthro classes have I cared the most about? And it was very much on the morphology side. It was very much on the, I want to look at bones and I want to look at CT scans. So I would encourage thinking about what methods you'd be interested in. So like, do you want to spend all your time on a computer making landmarks, or do you want to spend all of your time in a spreadsheet doing this? You know, like what skills do you want to get out of it? Like I was able to learn R, which was awesome. I wasn't expecting to like spend as much time as I did in it. And then along the way, I tried like 3 other programs to get all of my methods. And that process was the fun part. Like my to this day, I love my thesis and I'm very proud of it. But my thing I was most proud of was my landmarking guide that I made, because it was the culmination of hours and hours of me just figuring out the process for things and spending the time working on that. So those aspects of looking at methods, looking at just like what you're pulling from your classes, that every time you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, I could read another paper about that. I could think more on that. Are good ways to start. And it always comes back to how you're talking to other academics and like what they're bringing to you as like, oh, here's what I'm working on. How can you bounce off of that? And yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, Charlotte, do you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in like everything that everyone said, I completely agree with. Like you should think about like your personal interests, like the classes that you've really liked, like the areas of anthropology that you get like most excited about. But also in a practical sense, I would really recommend considering like what is physically and immediately available to you in your environment or surroundings, especially if you're sociocultural or health and medicine. Um, because if you're either of those tracks, you're going to need to either go to a location or engage with a community or a population of people. And Boston is like full of like so many different communities, places, like there's so many things that could be researched. So it doesn't need to be like some crazy, like out of the, like, I don't know, like you don't really need to like overthink it if you just kind of like observe things in your day-to-day. Like for me, that's how I got my idea, because I was like, okay, I already know I love like medical anthropology. I see these protests on the street every single day. It's like literally right outside of my apartment. It's like physically immediately accessible. And yeah, it just like you're gonna spend so much time like writing proposals, like waiting for IRB to get approved. Like you don't also want to be like killing yourself trying to find like informants or like a research site. So there's like absolutely no harm in like just picking something that like physically and practically like makes sense, and like you either have some kind of like relationship to, so you can like and like get access to that community, or like you're physically close to. Like one of my best friends from my class, she was a sociology major and she did her thesis on like DIY and party culture in Alston, and it was like insane, and it was all about like class stratification and like racism and gender stratification in Alston house parties. And she's going to do a PhD in like housing research, so like completely disconnected, but everything is transferable, so you don't need to like overthink it and be like, oh my god, like whatever my thesis is, like that's going to be my PhD or like my post grad work or something. I think it's just like if it's physically like doable and it's like speaking to your interests, and like you should just go for it.
Nothing. Like a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, an honors thesis, like I need to do like a dissertation, and that is not what the honors thesis is. It is a small doable project within the context of you still completing your bachelor's degree and all of the courses. So like, being ambitious is great, but like don't be too ambitious. Like
Choose something feasible.
yeah, like so I want to like call on Becca to talk about this, because Becca, you are doing a PhD dissertation right now. How does this compare to your honors thesis?
I feel well. I definitely resonated with a lot of what Charlotte said, in that like I feel like a lot of my skills were transferable to my PhD, especially my coding skills. Like that has been very helpful. I think that like there were definitely aspects of it that I think kind of like helped me get an idea of like what, grad school would be like, even though like grad school is also just its own very hard thing. Like for example, the actual process of defending your honors thesis, that was really helpful to just kind of seeing like, this is how it will work, kind of when I'm defending my dissertation. I thought that was like kind of a good primer, I guess. Um Yeah, I think that like, you know, just also learning how to do research and learning how to like ask questions was another really big thing that doing an honors thesis helped me. Like yeah, like I became really interested in lemur evolution because of my honors thesis. So that kind of like, you know, stemmed into a dissertation project that like really felt like, you know, my own kind of thing. So I guess to wrap up, like there are definitely like similarities, but like it's also like a dissertation is like its own whole thing that requires a lot of like, you know, other things that you're not getting in like a, you know, 1.5, 2 year honors thesis.
I'll also say that the less you know about a topic, the bigger you tend to like go for a project idea. And that's because you don't have a good enough grasp on whatever it is. And that's where your advisor comes in to like whittle it down and like feel like, wait, this is an entire field. Please rest. Like, choose one. So like the coming in with a big topic is great, but also again, thinking about like what your goals are throughout that process is going to be helpful again for your advisor. Because being like, I want to talk about X is not going to be enough for your advisor to really be like, okay, and what? Like, like how do you want to go about this? You know, so that's a helpful thing when you're looking at papers or you're deciding on topics, finding methods, finding things that feel a little bit more specific, like something you want to do in the process itself.
I think if I can just jump in, I think it's important also, like absolutely, if you already have plans to do grad school, like this is very helpful and it's a really good thing to do a thesis before that. And I also think that one of the amazing things about like being a student is that you can try things and decide that maybe it's not what you want, at least right now, right? And so I think even if if you don't have immediate plans that you know you want to do a PhD, you want to focus on bioanthro or socioculture, whatever, right? Like I think it's still a useful experience that has, as Charlotte said, so many transferable skills. And if you do it, like I think I did my thesis not knowing what my grad school plans would be. And I think having completed that and then realized, oh, I actually like I'm really proud of myself for doing this, but the kind of work I want to do, at least for the next couple of years, is going to look very different from this, right? Like that was a really helpful thing for me to know, and to know that I didn't want to jump right into grad school and maybe I wasn't ready yet, or just wasn't what I was looking for in that time. So I think that can be really useful. And just one other thing that I want to add about the like, how did you find your topic thing? I think particularly this might be more for sociocultural and med-anthro tracks, but I think that the tools of anthropology can be really interesting for things that you kind of just see in the culture. And I think sometimes as like Americans, we're like, we aren't the subject of interest in anthropology, right? Like we don't have like cultural aspects that are worthy of investigation, but we are like everything we see is culture, right? And so part of what I was thinking about when I decided to think about neurodiversity and ADHD was like noticing so many articles and lots of kind of like cultural conversations around the validity of diagnoses and like, oh, like this is like a trend in diagnostic culture, and why are we all thinking about diagnoses informing our identities, right? So noticing kind of like cultural conversation around that and being like, I don't think I think these conversations could benefit from the nuance of having like anthropological frameworks or anthropological methods to investigate those things. So really anything you notice, like in the news, on social media, in conversations with your friends, like those subjects are also worthy of anthropological inquiry. And so they don't have to feel like they're different or like separate from you, because you are also a cultural being. Yeah.
To what Bella said, just very quickly. I remember something that Professor Show had. I don't know if she knows that I remember it, but it was something she probably said in passing, and for some reason I internalized it. But during the early stages of brainstorming and sort of getting our ideas together in the cohort that I was in with Bella and Zoe and Jackson, who is not here, but hi Jackson. She mentioned that, you know, Zoe, I think it's Zoe, who was having reservations about their specific thesis topic. And their whole issue was, well, trans healthcare is like such a big topic right now, and they were expressing concerns over, well, it's done. It's a played out topic. It's almost so relevant that it's irrelevant. And Professor Shohat was like, well, you haven't done it. You haven't done that research. You haven't explored that topic. Sure, it's been done, but it hasn't been done by you. So I don't know if you remember saying that, but it really spoke to me, and I remember that. But I remember that. Even to this day, like I think about that, like, you haven't done it. And like you are, not to like Bella said, individualistic American culture. Not to say, we're all special, but in anthropology, every voice brings something to the table. And I think that that's something to really think about when you're considering something. And it's like, oh, well, autism, dude, everyone's got autism these days. Like, I don't know, like, like if you're thinking, oh, well, everyone's talking about neurodiversity, everyone's talking about, abortions, everyone's talking about gender care, everyone's, talking about monkeys. I'm sorry, I have to buy, like, I don't know. But, when you're thinking about those things, you haven't done them. And I think that's the important thing. Like, don't limit yourself. I mean, limit yourself because you want to stay focused and have a research topic, but don't limit yourself in that way.
And I think part of it is also, it's not just don't limit yourself, but if there is a topic that you're interested in, most likely there is, like, even if you think, oh, it's already all been done, most likely there is somebody among those community of researchers that you disagree with. And if you disagree with somebody, then that means there is room for you to say something else, right? Like to find another angle. And that's usually a good way to start the research, is to say what has already been said. And what is there still, like, what can I say? Like, do I agree with everything they said? Would I be finding the same exact things as everybody did? And most likely, no, you're not gonna be finding the same things. So even Emma doing research about herself, she didn't find out about just herself, right? Like you also found out about others.
Yeah, and things that I didn't go into my project considering, like, I think just because of geographically where we are, most of my participants came from the Northeast, and I'm originally from Broward County, Florida. I'm not from the Northeast. I noticed like geographic and like spatial and all of these other factors that I hadn't considered. Originally, I was just focusing on things like race and gender, but when I did my research, it was like, whoa, this is another factor that plays into obviously how these people grew up that differed a lot from how I grew up. Like they didn't have to worry about ADA violations and things like that. Their siblings just got the care that they needed. So something to think about.
Becca?
Yeah, I saw in the chat that like we should just add our final comments because I think we're a little over time, but I had a couple of just like really quick comments. So first, going back to, I think it was Bella that was talking about like, even though you're not like, even if you're not thinking about grad school, like it's a good thing to do. I would also like to say, if you are thinking about grad school, it's a great thing to do a thesis. Like I feel like I've kind of known since like the day I was born that I wanted to go to grad school. So I think this definitely set me up for success in graduate school. Like it taught me how to do research. It gave me questions that I was interested in that like helped me find an advisor. My current doctoral advisor also came to my honors thesis defense, which was so nice of her. But it was like, it definitely really, really set me up very well. And it obviously looked good on my applications for graduate school and everything. The other thing that I wanted to say is in terms of, I think this is more relatable to like biological anthropology, but I remember the last time I did one of these sessions, one of the pieces of advice that I gave that I do think is a good piece of advice is if you are doing an honors thesis or are doing research, like one of the things that you might want to consider is going to a conference, either Northeastern Evolutionary Primatologists, NEEP. There's a lot of NEEPers at BU, so you can talk to them, or our like national conference, American Association of Biological Anthropologists. It took me way too long to remember that, but I definitely, like, when I was doing my undergraduate research, I got some really good comments from other professionals in the field that like weren't at BU, that really helped me, like, you know, kind of I don't want to say elevate, but like helped me refine my like research methods that I was using and things like that. So when you are doing research and you are wanting to pursue an honors thesis, it's definitely something to think about, is just like getting outside perspectives on your methods and your work.
Thank you all so much, everyone on Zoom and in person. We appreciate you guys coming and talking about your experience. This is just our next meeting next week. We're still kind of looking into opportunities in anthropology. We're doing a forensic anthropology event, and Allie's gonna come and speak with us. She graduated from BU, which is my understanding that she was also the Anthro in the Works president previously. This is just gearing up for Halloween. We're gonna have some Play-Doh and some skulls for something fun to do while she presents about the master's program in forensic anthro. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
I think that all of the panelists today would be happy to answer your questions if you wanted to email them. So just let people here know, and I'm sure they'll be happy.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.